Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our online tasting. This is the second in the series of our Irish Wine Geese series. There's 3 altogether. We had Château de Kirwan last month. We're joined this evening by Yann Schÿler, who's the owner of Château Kirwan in Margaux. And then next month, we have John Charles Caz from Château Lynch joining. So an Irish spring in terms of the wines that we're featuring in January, February, March. Yann, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the Irish people who are listening to us. It's a great pleasure to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Yann. Before we start, I'll just go through the housekeeping rules. So the first thing to say is that we are recording this session, but we're only recording the hosts, Yann and myself. So you don't need to worry. You can leave your camera on, and it's lovely for us if you do, because otherwise we feel quite lonely here. You're not being recorded. We'll send the recording out tomorrow so that you can rewatch, or so that you can watch if you or your friends or colleagues didn't have a chance to watch this evening. It can be watched again. We'll send that link out tomorrow. We encourage you to eat and have water throughout the tasting in terms of responsible alcohol consumption. And to get the best view of the tasting session, if you can press speaker view, that will give you the best view. We encourage you to ask questions, and in so doing, there is a bottle of the delicious Les Charmes de Kirwan 2019 for the best question that we have, say, in the first 30 minutes of the tasting. We usually stop for a couple of minutes just to give you a chance to top up water or any snacks or nibbles. But I think that's everything in terms. There are Brian's people behind the scenes helping. Chloe is there running the meeting. So if you have any questions at all, pop them in the chat. And don't worry if we don't answer them immediately. We'll get round to them as soon as we can. So once again, thank you for joining us. Delighted that you could all be with us, and absolutely delighted to have Yann Schÿler, who is the owner of the family Château Kirwan, which is in Margaux, but he also has his own negociant business in Bordeaux, and more of that later. But Yann, first of all, would it be possible for you to share the history of Château Kirwan? Because I know that you are still in touch with members of the Kirwan family, which is absolutely fascinating. So it'd be great to hear some history of the chateau.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, indeed. So let us start with the history. History is very important in France. So Château Kirwan, the name of Kirwan arrived about, let's say, 250 years ago. Before that, which means in the middle of the 18th century, the chateau's name was Domaine de la Salle, and the owner was a gentleman called Mr. Collingwood. Collingwood was an advisor to the king, the late King Louis XV. This one was not, but it was not guillotined. He was the next one who was guillotined. And he had a daughter called Elizabeth, and Elizabeth married an Irishman called Mark Kirwan, who came from Galway. And why did he come from Galway? Of course, you know about all these, the wild geese, became the wine geese, these very, very skilled Irish families who were persecuted in what was then Ireland as part of the British Empire. So they had to find refuge in France, in Catholic countries, because they were Catholic families. A lot of them went to France to fight against Brits, and some of them decided not to fight, but to get into the wine business. And we have very good examples in the wine business, whether it is in Burgundy, whether it is in Cognac with the Hennessy's, whether it is in Bordeaux with the Lynches, the Bartons, the Fellons, and the Boyd, etc., and the Kirwans, of course. So Kirwan was, Mark Kirwan was from a very, very famous family, one of the 14 tribes of Galway, as well as the Lynches. And he was a wine merchant himself. And he married the daughter of the owner. That was the best way maybe to become a chateau owner, is to marry the daughter of the owner. You don't have to buy the chateau that way. That was very clever. And when the father-in-law passed away, they just decided to change the name of the estate from Domaine de la Salle to Château Kirwan. So as you know, the Irish are very proud people, and when they put their foot on a piece of land, piece of real estate, they put their name as well on it. So people remember, I have been here. And actually, this is why we still are called Château Kirwan, because what happened back right before the French Revolution was not changed after that. There was no reason to do so. The history of the Kirwans at the chateau was not very, very lucky, because it was just at the turn of the French Revolution. So we are talking 1789, then arrived the time of the French Empire, the wars, and the greatness of France, of course. But then we are talking about agriculture. And what happened with the family is that, well, the Kirwans were very productive. They had about 10 children. I guess some of them were fighting against each other about the property, but the biggest problem was the harvests, because in those days we didn't have much control, as much as we have today, over the quality of the harvests. And an unfortunate series of 4 relatively bad harvests in the late 1820s forced the Kirwan children, because then Mark Kirwan had passed away in 1815, forced the children to sell the property. So the property was sold by the Kirwans in the late 1820s. So the story of the Kirwans remaining at Château Kirwan didn't last more than 35 years, so to say, and no more than a generation and a half, so to say. So it went over 2 generations, and then they had to sell the chateau, which was then sold to a French family and then another French family. And make a long story short, 1855 was a very, very important date, because then we have the very famous, very well-known and respected classification of 1855, where Chateau then Kirwan was included in the classification, made then by Napoleon III, who was our last emperor. He had a very good idea, because he wanted to promote the fine wines of Bordeaux at the occasion of the World Exhibition of 1855, and to do so, he decided to create a sort of classification, like creating the group of the classical monuments of wine, so to say, of the Médoc, and that became the classification of the Médoc, ranked in 5 categories: the first growth, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth growth, altogether 62 chateaux, in which Chateau Kirwan was picked as first chateau of the third growth category, so which is very good. So in those days, the criteria were the location on the land, on the, not appellation, because there were no appellations in those days, on the commune, on the landscape, the prices the wines were selling at, and the prestige that they had in those days. So that was very important, which led then my family to get involved with Château Kirwan. And now we are talking about 1902, to be precise, 1902, where my ancestors then were becoming almost 200-year-old wine shippers, because my ancestors from the Schÿler side created a merchant business called Schÿer, which I am running today, which I have been working in for 36 years now, and created 1739. So we arrived from Germany, 1739, 50 years before the revolution. We arrived in Bordeaux just before the Kirwans arrived in the Médoc. That's quite funny, but they didn't know each other. We never ran into each other. But
they didn't know each other.
No, they knew the chateau.
No.
Ancestors knew the chateau, because
Okay.
the chateau was became classified, and it was famous, and it was a good wine. They probably had it on the list, but we have no proof that they had any kind of relationship. But the real relationship with Chateau Kirwan started in 1902. Then the owner of the chateau was the City Hall of Bordeaux. After successive transactions, the chateau became the ownership of the City Hall of Bordeaux. And the City Hall wanted to have a wine merchant distributing the wine in the world, which we did. And then came the war, World War I, which was very, very difficult, as you know. A lot of destructions, mainly in north of France, but France was actually down to the ground. And a lot of the properties were not maintained at all, or hardly maintained, we can say. And my great-grandfather had the opportunity to buy Chateau Kirwan in 1926. So that means we're going to have a party sometimes in In Dublin, in Ireland, next year.
Next year, definitely.
That's what it means. Already,
yeah.
you know that. There's going to be plenty of activities.
100-year anniversary party in Dublin next year.
Exactly. So that means my family...
Or in Galway.
Or in Galway, or both. We should do both. And that means that my family has been involved with Château Kirwan for the last 100 years.
Amazing. Congratulations, Yann.
Well, thank you, Lynne. And the funny part is that to finish the story, and I said before that my ancestors probably never ran into the Kirwans. But now actually we're in contact with the family, which is so nice. And it was my late father, whom you've known, who got in touch with the heirs of the Kirwans something like 20 years ago. They are not called Kirwans because they are heirs via a woman. So the name Kirwan disappeared in France, but they are direct heirs of Mark Kirwan, and they have archives, they have family trees, and they have letters, and we exchange a lot of information. They are very, very nice. They live right in the place where we source our barrels, in the Allier region, which is the center of France where the best oaks come from. And so we maintain a very, very close relationship with them because they're just so charming, and we discuss a lot about the family, and that's nice. So the circle is closed, so to say. So now we're in contact with them, and we are able to. Our job here, I consider myself as it's an obligation, and a pleasure also, mainly to promote.
Custodian.
Yes, to promote this Irish history and heritage. It's not only the wine, but it's also that unique Irish history which we care for, and which I am really willing to transfer to the next generations. And
when Kevin is on the Zoom this evening, but when we came out to Bordeaux, you were kind enough to show us the communication and so on between yourselves and the family. So it's lovely to have that connection still.
It is, and even we can see in the family tree that one of the Kirwan ancestors married an O'Brien, so we are cousins with the O'Briens as well. Kevin, you have the tree. So I gave it to you. Yeah,
and you're actually Irish, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, almost. I claim.
So I've got the Charme here, the Charme de Kirwan, 2019. So I think people can start, Yann, can't they?
Yep.
They can pour a glass. Yep. And we can talk about the wine.
Absolutely.
But, I think the interesting thing about Bordeaux for many people is that many properties, if you go to Australia or even to Burgundy or to Spain or Italy or many countries, would be making 6 wines, 8 wines, different grape varieties, different wine styles, etc. But really in Bordeaux, you make 2 wines, and that isn't uncommon in Bordeaux, is it, to have 2 wines? So maybe explain the difference between the Chateau wine and the second wine, Yann, because I think that's an interesting, unique point for Bordeaux.
Absolutely, that's right. Because in fact, we own a piece of land which is unique, which is classified as a third growth. So when you do that, your interest lies in producing as much Château Kirwan as you can, and in the best possible quality. But that means that you have to do with what you have. You are not allowed to buy grapes. You are not a wine merchant. You are a wine producer. So you may only produce with the grapes that you own. So to start with, you look at your land, your landscape. So Château Kirwan consists in 38 hectares, which is not very big. To give you an idea, the Margaux appellation is no larger than 1,200 hectares. So 1,200 hectares. Bordeaux is 100,000 hectares. So that's the size, 100,000 hectares. Margaux, 1,200 hectares. So that's 1% of Bordeaux. And we own 38 hectares out of 1,200 within the appellation.
Yeah.
So it's tiny. Yet, the point that I want to make is that those 38 hectares may sound very little, very reduced in size. But in fact, we have identified 35 mini vineyard within the property, or we may call them plots. And each of those plots has specifics in terms of terroir, in terms of earth definition, earth composition. And it is the understanding of these subtleties of terroirs that are going to contribute to the construction of the wine itself, Château Kirwan. But unfortunately, when you own even as little as 38 hectares, you find out that with those 35 plots, one plot is 1 hectare more or less, 1.2 hectares. So that's 100 meters this way and 100 meters the other way. That's no bigger than that. But you find out that in order to produce the best of the best of the best every year, not all the plots are exactly the same. Not all the plots are located on the best place, on the best spot, higher on the hill. You have plots which are looking down, some which are looking north, etc., etc. So basically, you have the better plots and you have the less good plots, so to say. So what do you do? The first thing you do is you are going to plant the right grape variety to the right soil, because we have different soils. It's not us who are deciding, I want to have Cabernet Sauvignon, I want to have... No, it is the soil that is requiring us to have some Merlot here, to have some Cabernet Franc here, to have some Petit Verdot there, and so on. So once we have understood the demand from the soil, from each of the plots, our job is to plant the right variety. Then the next point is, what is the result of that? The result of that is that out of 38 hectares, out of 35 plots, we have what we call the core of the property. So we have maybe 40%, 50% of the plots, which are the heart of the property, the core of the property, which are the very best ones, where the matching between the soil and the grape variety planted by my father, planted by my grandfather, or planted by myself a few years ago, produced the best wine. And it's always of the best quality, regardless of the vintage. And that will be only making Château Kirwan every year. So that's what we call the heart of the property. But that's only 40 to 50% of the 35 hectares, the 38 hectares. Then you have those plots which are looking, a little bit downhill, facing north, where a bit they have less gravel and more sand. So the characteristics of those plots are not 100% perfect. And even with the matching of the right varietal, you find out that when you taste those plots every year, there is a little something lacking. It is still Château Kirwan, it is still Margaux, it is still very good, but we think, in our opinion, it's not top perfect. So that will always make Les Charmes de Kirwan. So you have a plot making only Château Kirwan every year, and then you have, luckily, few plots, not 50%, maybe 10% of the plots which are producing Les Charmes de Kirwan every year because of the soil. And then between the two...
And the weather, Yann, does that feed into that every year as well? Or is it very specifically the soils and the plots?
So this is the base, what happens every year. And now I'm going to talk about what changes every year, which is the middle, those plots in between. And these are the plots that are given a chance on every vintage to be either Château Kirwan, if the weather has been good, so that answers your question, if the conditions have been perfect on that year, or if the conditions have been difficult, those plots will go to Les Charmes de Kirwan. So that's to say that we have three types of plots, if I resume the situation. So the plots making only Château Kirwan every year, so that's the heart of the property, that's about 40 to 50% of the 38 hectares. Then there is about 10% of the property which is making only Les Charmes, because it's like that, it's the lesser parts and so on. And then in between, there is approximately 40% of the plots which are given a chance to compete. They can become Château Kirwan every year. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And that is the game that we play doing the blend every year. Actually, now we just finished doing the blend of the vintage 24 that you, Lynne, and Kevin are going to, and Antonia are going to come and taste in a couple of months' time.
In April.
In April, exactly. So this is how it works. So basically, Les Charmes de Kirwan is a result of that analysis of this dedication to quality, whereby the very best plots will go into Château Kirwan, of course, which is the Cru Classé, the classified growth quality. And the second quality, which is not matching our standards to do a Cru Classé on that level, will be Les Charmes. It is a little brother to Château Kirwan, a slightly lighter version, a wine that you would enjoy slightly younger than Château Kirwan, but it's a very, very nice little brother, which we are very proud of.
So let's taste the little brother then, Yann.
Let's taste the little brother.
Yeah.
So the little brother is the vintage 19. So 19, some words about the vintage. Vintage is 19 is a very, very good vintage, I would say. A vintage that is defined by a fantastic fruit definition, an incredible balance with the tannins and the acidity, and therefore a wine which has a lot to show. It is not a wine which is highly concentrated, but it is very perfumed, very delicate, very aromatic, and yet with good tannins. So let's have a taste.
So let's taste, and you've described it as very aromatic and floral, and it definitely is, and maybe a tiny bit of spice there as well. How would you describe the palate, Yann?
So the palate, so on the palate, I think it is before very elegant. What is important with the wine from Margaux, and especially Château Kirwan, is that approach, which is very gentle. And when the wine arrives on the palate, it just fills the palate very nicely with no aggressivity, no bitterness whatsoever. So it is showing the fruit, mainly the fruit, which is upfront and wrapped up with very nice round tannins. So this is the idea. So the intensity of the palate here on Les Charmes, I would say, is medium, because we are looking for the higher intensity on the Château Kirwan itself. So Les Charmes has a medium to high intensity, rather medium than high. And this kind of balance, which we find very interesting, and which makes the wine very approachable, even young.
And tell me, in the 2019 Charme, what percentage was Cabernet and what percentage was Merlot?
So here we have a very we have a very classic blend. So it's about 58% Cabernet Sauvignon,
okay,
32% Merlot, and there is also a 10% Cabernet Franc. So
okay.
So it's very interesting. If you look at the grape varieties, we never analyze the grape varieties separately, because to us, it is like going to a concert, a symphony of Beethoven, and just listen to the individual instruments, which is not the purpose. The purpose of a symphony is to listen to the music, which is a symphony of Beethoven. If it is Beethoven you have chosen. So here the symphony is Margaux and Château Kirwan. And the cepage are contributing to this elegance and to this impression and to this drinkability, to this silkiness and roundness. And of course, the grape varieties really have a role to play, each individually. If you take the Cabernet Sauvignon, it's the structure of the wine, it's the dorsal spine, very important. I was going to say it's the most important, but as important maybe is the Merlot, which is the inside, which is the decoration of the house, which is what is inside. And the Cabernet Franc is the beam. It's something which keeps the structure going. And while we taste the Château Kirwan a bit later, we will see that we have a bit of Petit Verdot, which will be the spiciness, which will be the extra spice.
And then say, for example, the Cabernet Franc, in your vineyards, does that create quite an aromatic Cabernet Franc as well as the structure?
Yes, so the Cabernet Franc's role here is to provide the wine with some aromas. As you know, the difficulty of the Cabernet Franc has always been the ripeness. Ripeness was always very difficult. In the 70s, in the 80s, it was probably ripening 1 out of 3 times. Now, with the climate change, we are very lucky, because as much as the Cabernet Franc is not suffering from the drought, from the dryness of the weather, it is ripening properly. And if we make sure that it is not over extracted, then it provides us with very nice aromas, which we think
violets and
floral aromas.
Beautiful.
And 10-50%, so up to 20% is not a mistake.
No.
And we have the plot for that. As I mentioned, it is the plots which are deciding which grape variety we're going to have. And to have sort of 20% planted on the property is certainly helpful for the style of wine. And
it is very fragrant, the aroma profile and the charm. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, Yann, if that's okay.
Of course.
Number one, has the footprint for the Kirwan third growth changed since the 1855 classification.
So now we're talking about Kirwan, not Les Charmes in particular,
We're
right?
talking about Kirwan, yes, the
Yes,
estate.
exactly.
So
Yes.
have you got more vineyards that were classified in 1855 or
The
not?
footprint in that sense. Actually not, because to be honest, Château Kirwan is one of the very, very few chateaus which has the same vineyard as during the classification. There is a very simple reason to that. Number one reason is that the ownership has been very stable ever since. So since 1855, 3 owners. And over the last 99 years, 1 owner, which is us. So at least over the last 100 years, we know what we've been doing and not doing. So basically, our vineyard has not changed at all over the last 100 years. And we know from the books that between 1855 and 1926, when we bought the estate, hardly any changes were made. So actually, what was classified is what we have today. Okay. With maybe 1% difference, maybe.
Okay. Thank you for that question. It's an interesting one.
Very interesting, yeah.
So that was Rory. The next question, so Malbec used to be a Bordeaux grape variety. Was it ever used in your vineyard? As climate changes, would you consider Malbec again?
No, it was not, to my knowledge, it was not used on the property. And number 2, climate change. I'm not going to say that we are not concerned about climate change. But you have to think that our vineyards with those terroirs that we have are extremely resilient. So we are finding that when some vineyards are drying out in some regions, in some parts, ours are not drying out. We are very resilient. We always have water in the underground.
Are you mainly clay or gravel, or what's the makeup of the actual soils?
So the soil of the Médoc is mainly gravel and limestone. So therefore, a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. But in Margaux, we have more clay. We have veins of clay. So therefore, we have a good 30% of Merlot, which we have planted on those veins of clay. So this is a specifics that we have about Margaux, which is a bit different from the other appellations of the Médoc.
And Merlot likes clay, doesn't it? Retains water if it's dry.
It does. If you plant Merlot on gravel or on the limestone, you make a big mistake. Well, I mean, the wine won't be bad, but we are not extracting the best potential out of the soil. So basically, the matching between the soil and the grape is so important. And then, of course, with that soil, the resilience and the climate. No, the climate change doesn't make us change the grapes that we are using, actually. In other parts of the world, yes. Other parts of Bordeaux, yes, but not on the fine wine areas.
Okay, thank you. The next question is actually about global warming and the composition, but I think you've actually answered that just now. Can Yann explain your extraction process in the cellar? And we're going to talk about the cellar in a minute in terms of the small batch fermentations and so on. But yes, could you explain your extraction process, Yann?
Yes, very interesting. Extraction process.
From Rory again.
Means, yes, the extraction process, the answer is as little as possible. As less intervention as possible. We let the wine do itself on its own. So that's very simple.
Lazy winemaking, Yann, but it works.
Very lazy. You know, you make the best wines by not intervening a lot. What does it mean? It means you need the right climate, the right earth. Then you need the right plots. On those plots, you need the right varieties. And then you need those grapes to ripen perfectly. If the grapes are perfectly ripe, you just gently, pick them by hand. You fill the tanks by gravity, and you just control the fermentation. And once you think you have enough color, you stop. You do a little bit of remontage. Now, instead of doing the pumping over, which may, oxidize the wine. It could oxidize the wines a little bit during fermentation, but now we do it differently. We use the air pulse, which is an enormous pipe that we insert into the tank. It's a 5-meter pipe, and we just send pressed air through that pipe, so that creates a bubble and a tsunami within the tank, which contributes to blending the skins, which are on top, 1/3 of the top, which is the skins and the pits, with the clear juice, which is underneath. And by doing so for 20, 30, 40 seconds every day, depending on the needs of the tank, we just extract very, very gently, but very as little as possible. Because if the grapes are ripe on this climate that we have, on that soil that we have, with those characteristics, the tannins go on their own into the wine. You don't have to intervene. So extraction is extremely simple and highly limited.
Very gentle.
Very gentle.
The next question, Yann, do you think is the Galway heritage that makes the wine so good?
Certainly. I must be very, very... See what I have here? It says Kirwan also. Yes, this is a pride that we have. And also, Lynne, you mentioned I am a little bit Irish. So
You are.
yes, I must admit that I have become so. And I am proud of it. I'm proud of it. Yes, indeed.
And we're proud to have your wines in our brines, Yann.
Thank you.
Really are.
Thank you, Lynne.
So in the data sheet, it mentioned selected yeasts, presume cultured yeast for charm. That's from Rory again. I think Rory might be a student, a wine student.
No,
He's got lots of lovely technical questions, and we like technical questions.
Yeah. Well, the yeasts, they're exactly the same for Charme or Kirwan, because as I said in the beginning, well, yes, for 10% of the production, we know that these plots are going to make Les Charmes. But for most of Les Charmes, we give them the chance to produce Kirwan. So the yeasts are yeast that we use in order to enhance the fruit and avoid some nasty taste. But I don't think, I am not a technician, I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to talk about things I don't know exactly. And so the questions, that question is not.
But I mean, Pierre, the cellar master, he would inoculate, wouldn't he?
So that's something, inoculate, that's another thing. Inoculate,
yeah.
Oh yes, those are with bacteria, not yeast. So inoculation.
He would use, in Bordeaux, is it not common to inoculate both the fermentation yeast and the malolactic yeast at the same time?
So exactly. So this is what we have been doing for the last 10 years. So we call it co-inoculation. So we are adding yeast for the alcoholic fermentation and for the malolactic fermentation, because we found out that it is a lot safer, a lot more practical to have this malolactic fermentation done as quickly as possible, which means at the same time as the alcoholic fermentation. Then we inoculate bacteria in order to provoke the malolactic fermentation. So we are one of those estates believing in the fact that we have to do it at the same time. There's only a third or fourth of the chateaus which are doing so. So we are a minority, but I think it's very positive, because then the wines is clearer, earlier. You can make the better decisions by tasting the wines, and the wines are cleaner. You're not in danger. If the malolactic is done, the wine is clean and protected. Yeah.
Or if you have that delay between alcoholic and malolactic, that's a danger period, isn't it? So by co-inoculation, it takes that away.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Do you irrigate is the last question for the moment.
You want me to go to jail?
I don't want to go to jail.
It is forbidden to irrigate. So let us recap the laws in France. Irrigation in appellation contrôlées are strictly forbidden, because you are changing the nature of the terroir, of the wines. You are transforming rain water into wine, so to say. So this is allowed by derogation in Mediterranean appellations on demand, on justification. On Atlantic appellations, so when I say Atlantic, it's southwest, which means Bordeaux. It is not allowed unless if there are some specific requests where we can show that the vineyards need some water by fear of losing the whole crop, or losing the estate, as simple as that. So to come back to a fine wine and to the appellations of the level that we are producing, it is absolutely forbidden, completely against your interest to irrigate, completely against. If you do so, you'll kill yourself and you go to jail on top of that.
Okay.
So, no way.
So Yann, we're going to take a break for a couple of minutes, but before we do, I'm proposing that I decant my 20 Kirwan, because what we were discussing this earlier, and we'll talk about it in a minute, But we were saying about if it's an old vintage you want to, I can't really see. It's an old vintage you want to remove sediment, but a younger vintage maybe to air the wine and to soften it. So are you happy for me to decant it?
Absolutely, you're very welcome. Yeah, and you
Okay.
described exactly what is the purpose of decanting, removing the sediment for an old wine more than 20 years old. Remember, the bottle has to be laying horizontally, so you are not stirring the wine several times. You just do it in one movement from a bottle which has been laying horizontal for at least 3 months. And then second advantage, if you have a young wine, which is exactly what you are doing, Lynn, is to decant for airing purposes. You are airing the wine, so you are helping the wines to open itself.
Okay.
And
That just lets a little oxygen in and release aromas and
absolutely
possibly soften the tannins. So I'm decanted that, and I'm going to say that we'll be back. That is now, that's actually 7:36 according to my watch. So we'll take 2 minutes to just let people top up with water or get some snacks, and we'll be back at 38.
Or have a Guinness, or have a Guinness.
Or have a Guinness, that's true. But we'll be back in 2 minutes just to then start talking about Château Kirwan. Thank you so far, Yann. Fascinating.
Thank you, Lynn.
What? It was just unlucky, I guess. Anyway, or lucky being in Sicily.
Yes,
anyway,
indeed.
So I've decanted the Kirwan 20. I'm going to pour myself some now. So Yann, why don't you describe? Let's talk about the wine flavors first of all and aromas, and then we'll talk more about the cellar if that's okay, because the cellar's quite new and it's interesting on this specific plots, and you're doing individual fermentations and so on, which is the ability that's been brought to you when the new cellar came in 2015. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. These are the new cellars, the ones we have now. If anyone comes and visits us, you'll see those cellars, which were inaugurated to function for the first time with the vintage 15. Did you want me to talk a bit about the weather in 20 or not?
Yes, and the chateau, Yann, if you move slightly to this side, we can see a picture of the chateau behind you.
Yes.
That's the Château Kirwan behind you, an evening picture, which is a beautiful picture of the chateau.
Yeah.
Yes, because you're doing our call from, I know you're at home in Bordeaux this evening, and the chateau's at least an hour's drive away, but anyway, we can see the picture of it, which is lovely.
Exactly.
And it's a beautiful property to visit if anyone is going to Bordeaux. So yes, talk about the 2020 weather.
Yeah, so 2020 weather was a bit hectic to start with, because we had 2 extremely humid months, which are April and May. So we started having some mildew, which is a terrible disease which is killing the buds and reducing the yields drastically. Remember, last time we had a severe mildew was in vintage 2018. So 2 years later, it happens again, but luckily, in the middle of June, the weather starts to be extremely dry. And for 2 months, up to the middle of August, there is no single drop of rain and very, very dry and hot weather. So 2 advantages. First, that has killed the mildew. So the mildew started to do some work, destruction of buds, but not completely. So luckily, we still have very limited yield on the 2020 because of that, but it has some advantages as well. And then, of course, 2 months of fantastic weather did create some ground for an extremely concentrated vintage. And this is what we are having today. Luckily, we got a little bit of rain, because with 2 months of drought, the vineyard starts to suffer a little bit. But we are in Bordeaux, we're in the southwest of France, we are near the Atlantic, and there is sometimes going to be some rain. And this is, when I talk about rain on the west coast, in Galway, it's the same, but it's in Ireland. We
Bordeaux, understand rain here.
You understand the rain. So, but for us, we're a bit further south, and we have the same phenomenon, but a bit less rain, with a hotter climate. And that rain actually, helped the grapes to mature further. And harvest was very simple, very nice conditions. And the result is a vintage which has a definite concentration. So that's very different from the 19 vintage we had previously with Les Charmes. If you take Les Charmes 2020, you have a very warm year, yet not exotic. Lynne, if you remember the 18, I consider the 18 as exotic. almost a little bit, I would say, Californian. It's a bit strange to say that. But 20 is not Californian. 20 is in between 18 and 19. 19 being very floral, very balanced, very very drinkable, you know, fills your mouth very simply. But 20 is more tight, more concentrated, it doesn't have more tannins, but the structure of those tannins is different. They are more rich, more round, and you have a bit more concentration. On the nose, you have a lot of black currant. Can you see those black currant? It's amazing. You almost crunch the...
Really cassis, yes.
Cassis, exactly.
A nice acid as well, Yann. It's very fresh. On the
very
finish.
much so. Remember that this is maybe interesting for all the viewers to see and understand what is important when we define the wine on a Cru Classé. We are talking about, we're not talking about tannins, we don't want concentration, we are talking about balance between the elements. If you have so much tannins, rather than so much tannins, then you need to balance out those tannins with something which is called acidity. And that acidity has to be wrapped up with another thing which is called the fruit. And then altogether, you need the right amount of alcohol. So these are the four elements that are so important that they have to match together. Otherwise, you find a wine which might be very tannic and low in acidity, or very acidic, which means not ripe, and low in tannins, which means dry tannins. So all these things, what we are looking for is balance. And in the end, now we have a vintage 2020, which is concentrated. You may feel, oh, there is a lot in this bottle of wine, but you have freshness, you have this acidity which is there, and which is making this bottle, this glass of wine, taste actually almost as if it was light. It is not light, but it makes this glass of wine quite sustainable.
It's very accessible, even though it's 2020. It's a very because it's not, we talked about extraction earlier, it's not over extracted.
Exactly.
Everything is a balance. So even though you could consider 2020 Margaux youthful, it's actually still extremely drinkable and fresh and elegant, and I think it's delicious. So tell me, let's have some flavour descriptions from you, Yann, for this vintage.
Yes, indeed. So black fruit. On the nose, I have some cinnamon, like cannelle. So that's the spiciness. Remember that we have 7% Petit Verdot. So we mentioned about the grapes before.
Touch of spice there.
Touch of spice, exactly, which is quite important, because when you have so much softness with the, not over ripeness, but this richness of tannins, it's very nice to have a bit of Petit Verdot. So here the blend is 51% Cabernet Sauvignon, 28% Merlot, 14% Cabernet Franc, and 7% Petit Verdot. So here, compared with the Les Charmes 19, we have a bit less Cabernet Sauvignon, a bit more Franc, and some Petit Verdot. So that is the difference. So this is why you have this vanilla cinnamon character, which is on the nose.
Touch of thyme as well.
Thyme, yes.
Touch, mint, you know, kind of slightly.
And then what is extraordinary about this wine is the grain of the tannins. The tannins, you can almost bite into them. I mean, tannins, you have to imagine tannins is something solid, as if you could bite in it. But being solid, if you taste a rough tannic wine from somewhere else, I won't say where, you choose, you may have tannins where you feel you have sand in your mouth. You can bite, it's not very pleasant. Tannins are a bit disrupted. They are not melted together. Here, the tannins, when you see this, there's a lot of tannin, but tannin is really wrapped up, rounded.
Silky.
It is surfaced, completely surfaced. And this is what we are looking for. So no aggressivity whatsoever. And of course, those tannins are intense on the palate. So to talk about aromas at this stage is a bit difficult because the wine is young. We are having the primary aromas. So blackcurrant, a bit of spices. But if you want to have more aromas, you have to wait the second stage, les arômes secondaires, as we call in French. The second stage of aromas when the wine is about 10 to 12 years old. And then when the wine is more than 20 years old, you have the tertiary aromas. And then you have that kind of flower, that the cedar tree, the cigars, and the tobacco, those things. So at this stage, the aromas are fairly simple, but you can feel that the structure, the phenolic components are so rich that they are going to give so much. So this is why the best thing to do with a wine like this is to buy a case, and wait 6 months to open the first bottle, and then another 2 years for the second bottle. And then gradually you add a few more months, and then you see the wine mature over time.
Evolving.
It's
a nice idea.
It is.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you an interesting question, because not only, as we know, you're the owner of Château Kirwan, but you're also a Bordeaux négociant or a Bordeaux broker. So this is a difficult question for you. What is your favourite wine from the whole of Bordeaux, apart from Château Kirwan?
Oh my God. My favorite wine. So is it white wine or a red wine?
Oh, you choose, Yann.
So if it's a white wine, it is not from Bordeaux. It will have to be from Burgundy. So
I know what you're going to say now.
Yeah, so it could be from Pouilly-Fuissé. We have common friends there.
Chateau
Fuissé, for instance, yes, I love their wines, or even Domaine Ferré, or so I'm not scared to say what I'm drinking, to mention what I'm drinking, because I mean you know what I'm drinking, and when you're at home, in my home, you know exactly what I'm pouring. No, so for whites, the topic is to me the best wines in Burgundy, not necessarily Meursault, not Montrachet, but a good Puligny, Chassagne, a good Saint-Aubin. For me, it's you need to spend just 50 bucks, 50 euros a bottle. You don't need to spend 500 euros a bottle to have a nice, decent bottle of white wine, which doesn't mean the white bottles are not good. If you take a Château de Fiesole or Abbaye de Fiesole, it's very, very decent wine because it's a Cru Classé. So you have very, very decent wine.
So you like your oaked Chardonnays?
Yeah, not so much oaked. It's not the oak.
The intensity of the
intensity. Yes. By the way, we planted some Chardonnay at Château Kirwan, 1 hectare. You will see in a couple of years. We make them in a Burgundian way. It's a vin de France. It's not a Bordeaux wine because it's Chardonnay. It's a kind of an experimental production we are doing, and we're going to have fun with it. It's because I like Burgundy whites, so we thought, well, let's make a white Burgundy in Château Kirwan, but we won't call it. Cannot be called a Burgundy.
I'm looking forward to tasting it.
You will see.
So,
but then coming to the red, so the
Château Fisset, by the way, I have to say this is available in O'Brien's. Somebody that we've worked with for a very, very long time, the same as yourself, Yann. 44 years with O'Brien's, is it?
Oh, fantastic! Almost as long as we. Fantastic history. Yeah.
So you're still skirting around the question of apart from Château Kirwan and Bordeaux.
No. So, but the question, I have the answer. For red wines, I am not sticking on any particular wine, because if you stick on a particular wine, it means you don't want to go out and discover new wines. So in my position, with my personal tasting and drinking history, I allow myself to be surprised at any time with any wine, and I don't stick to any particular wine where I say that's the best wine for me. It's always the best wine. So I have a lot of memories from fantastic bottles, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, 1 week ago, but I'm never sticking to one single wine and say this is the best. I always open the door to tomorrow can be another best wine, and so on and so on. So it's a permanent discovery to me.
And it's a living, wine is a living, breathing thing.
Exactly.
It changes, the pressure changes the wine.
It does.
The location changes the wine. Obviously the vintage, the food, the company. And Yann, Kevin O'Brien and myself have been fortunate enough to enjoy amazing bottles with you. And I know that you're extremely adventurous in terms of your food and wine matching. And we would frequently have enjoyed very traditional food with traditional Bordelais wines. But we'd also have enjoyed sushi with red
Yes.
Bordeaux, and
Yeah.
you really, I know that you're very innovative and adventurous when it comes to your food and wine matching, which is always a great pleasure when we come to see you. So I know that you're very widespread taste
Completely.
and that you enjoy. Okay, next question. Apropos of nothing, is Château Kirwan on the France Passion Network?
On the what?
The France Passion Network. I don't know what that is. Maybe you can give us a bit more information there, and we might be able to
I'm sorry, I don't
answer
know
that question. Did the weather in 2020 influence the variety inclusion?
The variety inclusion?
Yes,
What does
the
it mean?
blend. The blend.
Ah, the blend.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it did to a certain extent, because the Petit Verdot was included in the Grand Vin. So Petit Verdot used to be an impossible variety to mature. I remember when I was young, or even when I started working 35 years ago, Petit Verdot was maturing once every 3 times. So because if it was maturing at all. So now with this weather, the Petit Verdot is maturing probably sometimes even before the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is very unique. And those Petit Verdot were very, very, very interested to happen, because this little bit of spiciness, those now in this 27%, we have 10% on the property, are extremely helpful, because when they are good, nothing can beat the Petit Verdots in Margaux. I'm not talking about only Château Kirwan, but in Margaux in general, we are the kings of Petit Verdot. But remember, Petit Verdot cannot be used alone, never. It's too, it needs to be used as a 10, 20% next to a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Merlot.
Okay. Thank you. The next question, or just a comment here, that decanted the Château Kirwan a few hours ago, and it's drinking beautifully. Félicitations, Yann.
Merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Yann, what is the oak treatment on do the two wines get? Yann, maybe this is a good time to just talk. I've got to say, I think the winning question has to be the question about the Galway heritage is the reason why the wines are so good. I think that's the winning the bottle of Charmes de Kirwan. It's not technical,
fantastic,
but it's a bit of fun. So if you can just, one of the team at Coyle will get in touch and ask you for contact details so we can send that bottle of Charmes de Kirwan out for you.
I guess you have to send it to someone in Galway.
I'm thinking it might be going to Galway. Yeah, I think it might be.
I might have to go back to Galway some days.
I think you will. And your 100th year next year, Yann.
Oh, yes, my God.
100th anniversary.
It's about time.
Let's talk a bit about these new fermentation tanks in the winery, because they're very specific, aren't they, in terms of...
They are very specific.
And it's even though Pierre's been there for years, he's a fantastic winemaker, it's allowed him more flexibility with the actual fermentation from the different plots and more gentle extraction. I know that you believe that since the 2015, the wines have changed a bit.
They have actually, the idea is it all comes down to the earth, to the terroir, to the soil. It's the base of everything. So vinification, as I said, is minimal. And in that sense, once you ask yourself, how can I improve my wine in terms of purity, in terms of definition, in terms of, precision and so on, then you have to have a cellar which is matching your vineyard, which means that each plot of land that you have defined being a unit, being a piece of land that you want to vinify on its own, because it's a single variety which is exposed south on the soil, which is like this. And if you move another 100 meters, it's another soil. It is the same variety, but another soil. So those two you need to vinify separately. So therefore, you need 2 separate tanks in your cellar, etc., etc., etc. And if you multiply it by 35 plots, you need 35 tanks. And before that, before the new winery that we have, we only had 25 tanks. So we needed 10 extra tanks. So either you put 10 tanks in the garden outside, which is not possible, or you destroy everything and you make a new cellar with smaller tanks, so that the tanks are going to be matching the plots that you have in the vineyard. And this is exactly what we did. So defining the size of the tanks to the right plots that you want to vinify is the first thing. And then what type of what types of tanks are you going to use? Wood, cement, or stainless steel. We have chosen cement because we wanted to have a specific shape for the tanks in order to enhance a natural extraction. We talked about the extraction before, saying that we do very little intervention. And in order to avoid any intervention, you need a tank that has the same shape as this glass. Can you see the shape of the glass? Like a tulip. You see, it's like this. It's not straight here. It's slightly narrower to the top than from the bottom. And actually, this is, well, now I think you can see it. This is actually the shape of the tanks that we have at Château Kirwan. Because this way, when we fill the tank with grapes, the proportion of solid parts on the top with the liquid parts at the bottom is ideal to enhance a naturally made extraction without any, or with very little intervention as much as possible.
And in terms then, so we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left, Jan, but in terms of the oak treatment then, between the two
wines.
So thank you for the talk about the tanks.
So the second wine goes into, second 2-year-old barrels for a part and for another part in tanks. So there is relatively little oak, but zero new oak. It's absolutely not necessary because Les Charmes de Kirwan is a wine that you have to be able to drink within 3 years of the vintage and up to 20 years. I have very old charms in my cellar, which I have forgotten about. I pulled the bottles quite recently, and 20-year-old, they were absolutely fantastic, but ready to drink. They had to be. So up to 20 years, charms, you have absolutely no problem. But best is within 3 to 5 years of the vintage. But then Château Kirwan is another story. The oak is very, very specific. We are working with 12 different coopers, and each cooper has a single sourcing for the oak. They have a special way to toast the oaks inside. So by having that diversity of coopers and suppliers, we're able to, further define the texture of the oak tannins that are going to be helping the wine to age into the barrels. Barrel aging is 18 months, so it's quite a long time. And therefore, we're experimenting new types of barrels, only French oak, no American oak, no, only French oak.
Is it all Limousin or is it Allier?
The Limousin, Allier, but mostly Allier.
Mostly Allier. Okay.
And we tend to use oak with very, very medium, low to medium toasting. We don't want oaky wines. I'm actually, look at this 2020 Kirwan, you can't feel any oak at all.
No.
And that's a good sign. A wine which is tasting of oak is a bad wine. A wine which has a lot of oak, which you cannot feel, is the best oak you can have.
Yeah, it's very integrated, isn't it, in the 20?
Very much so, yeah.
Recently, we had the pleasure of drinking a 2017 Château Kirwan. How does it compare with the 2020? Would the 17 or the 20 be considered a better vintage?
Oh, it's very, very different. 2017.
It's like asking about your favorite child, isn't it? You can't really.
No, not at all, because you love them both, but for different reasons, on different characters. So the 2020 is definitely a wine which is more. Which has a spiciness, which has a richness, and which has a long ability to age, which is a great vintage. And the 17 is a vintage which is more on the perfume, not so much tannic, drinking early. So drinking 17 today is good. It's fairly young. Drinking well, you can wait another 5 years, another 7 years, not 8 years, but no more than not 10 years. I wouldn't wait more than another 10 years. Whereas this 20, we can come back in 20, 25 years time and we will enjoy a fantastic bottle of wine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a couple more questions and then we're kind of at our time. As a negociant, what's Yann's view on the future of Bordeaux and Premier?
Oh my God! So I think that it all comes down to how wise the properties will be. I'm not talking about Kirwan in particular because Kirwan were always very wise. The price variations are very limited over time, but it all comes down to how wise the top estates, the very expensive estates, the super second estates, are going to be. Facing the market. Facing reality. So now already on the last vintage, there's been a drop of 28% in average on the market, on the release price. And I think that it's in everyone's interest that the chateaus really understand what's going on, and that they actually offer prices where everyone finds, its way. So we as merchants have to sell, you, O'Brien's, as customers have to buy and resell to your customers, private individuals who are not getting rich every day with the high energy prices, with a bit of inflation. Now inflation is coming down a little bit, but basically the times of today are not towards inflation. So basically I think that en primeur, everyone wants to stick to the en primeur system because it's about 70 to 80% of the selling of the fine wines of Bordeaux, which is happening at this moment. So it's an important moment, and nobody wants to miss the train. So I think there is still a great future. Well, that would deserve a much broader explanation if we want to categorize the various types of fine wines that we're dealing with. Wines below this price, wines between that and that price, and then up. But altogether, yes, there are challenges, but I think that, I have plenty of confidence into the producers.
Okay. French Passion is a network that, with the help of Vigneron Indépendant de France, provides gastronomic and wine network across France with local producers for motorhome stays. Great concept. It sounds interesting, doesn't it? Right, yeah. I'm going to get to the last couple of questions, Jan. We're over time, but I don't want to not answer the questions. Have you availed of the network crisis? I don't know what that is. Oh, no, sorry. Someone's asking if the person's availed of that French Passion network. Okay. Very interesting to hear that Yann has planted a hectare of Chardonnay. Bordeaux used to produce more dry white wine. Will wine become more commercially important in the coming decades?
It is true that there is a trend towards white wine overall. The consumption of white wine is increasing and the consumption of red wine is slightly decreasing. So altogether, yes. Bordeaux, I've known a time when, producers were, drastically reducing the amount of red wine to produce more whites. And then after that, they were removing vineyards of white to plant red again. That was 20 years ago. So these are waves which are going up and down with the trends and but the problem that we have is the younger generation. So what will the younger generation drink in future? That is the big question. Will it be red? Will it be white? Or will it be something else? So that is the problem that we have. It's not so much red or white. Today is more towards white than red. That's the trend on the relatively short term. But the most important trend that we have to find out about is the younger generation. What will they drink?
Okay, very last question, Yann, which I think is a very interesting one. What are the oldest bottles you have in your cellar?
You have drunk them.
How often are you tempted to try the very old vintages? I can tell he's tempted quite often to drink very old vintages because I've enjoyed, and so has Kevin.
You have enjoyed many of them, but that's a very funny question. No, I mean, to me, wine is not a collection item. It's not a gold bar. It's not it's not a piece of investment. It's a product to share with friends, with whomever you want, and it's the experience of the sharing which is important. So my old wines, I share them, and Lynne, you are the testimony of that. So the oldest wines that I have are from before World War I, so they are over 100 years old now, and they have, some of them have a lot of life, some of them have less life. But each of these individual bottles have to be respected, and when I open them and decant them, because they have a lot of sediment, very important to decant them with the candle, not to let any drop of sediment come into the decanter and the glass. These bottles are just a piece of history. You have to think of the women who harvested those grapes during the war, World War I, those children who were harvesting while their fathers were at war. Fighting on the front. So, this is what you are thinking of. And there, no other experience. You might enjoy your sushi along with these extremely old wines. And it is such an experience which I recommend you share. So if you ever run into a very, very old bottle of wine, please do not keep them and think you are rich. Open it, enjoy it. A lot of people write to me and say, oh, I have this very old bottle. How much is it worth? I say, I don't know, but drink it. This is my recommendation.
Exactly. Thank you, Yann. That's a very, very pertinent point to end on.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's been fascinating chatting to you. We could definitely be chatting all night, but really, really appreciate it. And we'll certainly see you in Dublin in October for the Wine Festival, which is the 10th and the 11th of October, which is in the RDS.
Yes.
And we should definitely talk about doing something next year for the 100th anniversary of your family owning Château Kirwan. So we should definitely talk about that. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you taking your time to, and I hope that you enjoyed the wines. And just the other thing to mention is that Château Lynchbage is the tasting next month on the continuation of our Irish Wine Geese series. We appreciate everyone joining us. And Yann, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Lynne, and thank you, Armand, and thank you for your patience, all of you.
Okay.
We'll see you in Dublin on the 11th of October, right?
10th and 11th of October in Dublin. It's a date.
I'll be there. I'll be there again.
Thanks, Yann.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.